Professor Brittany Cooper from Rutgers, who talked about Beyonce and sort of rap and women's representations and struggles and also successes in that genre. Was very cool. Lecture, very interesting event. Then what did we have? We've just been going.
Up there.
Oh yes, we had a wonderful speaker here who is the founder and director of an organization called UPNEA, Women Worldwide, which is dedicated to eradicating the traffic in prostitution, human trafficking across the world, and for that was our organization this year that we raised money for through the various programs that we host throughout the year. And I'm happy to report that we were able to present her with a check for $500. And this is an award-winning organization. She herself has won many awards, including the Clinton Global Initiative Award and others through the UN. So we were very proud to be able to say the Montclair State University's program in Women and Gender Studies was able to raise some money based on your generous donations. For the time being, this is our last program, academic program for the year. We will have one more event coming up on April 28th, which is a Tuesday right here at this time. You're all invited, you're all welcome to come, because that program, that event will be an event where we honor our graduating seniors. Very sadly, we are saying goodbye to 20 of them, but it's been wonderful having them. So that's one of the things, but we're also going to be sharing information about what the new program is going to look like, what some new courses are, some new and exciting events that we're thinking of planning around. To promote the new program. There'll be some fun skits. Some of us will be roasted or toasted by students like you. So do come by. There'll be lots of food, so on and so forth. So you're all invited. Mark it on your calendars and come. And we actually have a sign-up sheet that Lashana Walters, say hi Lashana, you see how color coordinated we are in the program? That's our program assistant who runs a tight ship out of Dixon 120. 120 and 121 are our program offices. We invite you all to come, stop by, find out more about the program, pick up our brochures, ask your questions, and if you're not already in our program either as majors or minors or second majors or whatever, and you are interested and you'd like to know more, then we ask that you please put your name and your email contact information on that sheet that Lashana is holding and passing around. So make sure it comes all the way around, and just take a minute of your time to put your name and your email information on it. And at the very least, will put you on a list where you can be kept abreast of all of the exciting and interesting programs and speakers that we host throughout the year. And with that, I want to just say that we're delighted to have one of our own here tonight to speak to you, Professor Yasemin Besen, who has been a long-time affiliate faculty in the program in Women and Gender Studies and will continue to be part of the program, a very active part as we go forward under our new guise. She is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology. So Women and Gender Studies, or Gender, Sexuality, and Women's Studies as we will now be, we really draw from a lot of different disciplines. We are probably one of the most interdisciplinary programs around in this college, and so we draw from the kind of work and research that professors like Professor Besen-Cassino do in sociology, what other professors here like Julie Landweber sitting up here, I think one of some of your students are here, your class is here? Or? 1+. Cool, thank you. Always, Professor Landweber is actually one of our only faculty who has a half line in our program as well as in history, and teaches many of our important core courses in the program. Professor Julie Landweber here, who is an assistant professor. I'm sorry, Julie Farnham, Landweber, Farnham, it's late, and I've done too many programs. Professor Farnham, interchangeable. No, very individual. And Professor Farnham here is in the Department of Anthropology. She has been the GLBTQ minor coordinator for this year, and next year will be taking over as the director of the program, so you should all get to know her. And yeah, so sign up, come and see us, join us. We would love to have you be part of our program. So to get back to Professor Yasemin Besen-Cassino is an associate professor of sociology. She has also won one of our most prestigious awards in the university, University Distinguished Scholar for the year 2012-2013, is currently working as the book review editor of a journal in that you can see how it touches on both the fields of sociology and also gender studies, because it's called Gender and Society. Her PhD is in sociology from this SUNY Stony Brook, not very far from us, and while there she worked as managing editor of a journal called Men and Masculinities. And one of the courses that she has devised that is taught or cross-listed both in sociology and also counts for our majors and minors in our program is called Men and Masculinities, and it is a very popular course, which shows you that our program takes all of gender identities very seriously. We're not just a program that focuses only on quote-unquote women's issues, because women's issues and women's concerns are obviously part and parcel of something that affects everybody, including men. Her work has appeared in many very important peer-reviewed journals in the field: Context, Journal of Contemporary Ethnography, Theory and Society, and so on. The work that she has recently finished, was a research project that was funded by an organization called the American Association of University Women, was focused on the issue that she will be speaking to us tonight about, which is the gender wage gap, and what that means and how it affects women and obviously men by comparison, right? But she worked on that, studied it in New Jersey, and that has been published by the AAUW, and she has testified, it says, as an expert witness at the New Jersey State Legislature, and I'm hoping that maybe that's something you can also share with us tonight, because it's always interesting to see how the work that we do that you may think is only confined to the classroom obviously is not. As researchers, as scholars, and particularly as sort of activist scholars in our field, we do work that has other consequences in society and actually might affect and change laws so that society continues to become more progressive and more equal. So we appreciate that work, and her new book, Consuming Work, focuses, I'm sorry? Oh, there it is. Here it is. Wow, congratulations. Consuming Work, Youth Labor in America, focuses on the issue of part-time youth labor in America, as well as other industrialized countries. And in it, she explores issues like the inequalities that affect the youth labor force. She's won many other awards as well, such as the Dean's Award in Teaching here in 2008. And so with that, I'd like to welcome and ask you to join me in giving her a very warm round of applause. This is one of the ways that we like to really honor the faculty who are dedicated to our program and who do so much for our community and for our college and our students. Thank you, Yasemin.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Could I get a show of hands? How many of you worked when you were teenagers? Wow, almost everyone. How early did you start? 14? 15?
15.
Do I hear a 13? 12? So 13, 14 is when we're starting. Where did you work?
Library.
You worked at the library? Anyone else? Where did you work?
Doctor's office.
Doctor's office.
Pizzeria.
Very nice.
Babysitting.
Babysitting. I hear yard work. Now, let's start with this project of mine. This is from my very recent book. So this is recently finished work that has been going on for a decade, so I'm sick and tired of it. But here we go. Now, here's the reality. If we look at our labor force, just an overview, many of you said you worked at 14, 15. Well, our law says, the Fair Labor Act of 1938, and we have not revised it since, yay, sets our minimum age for working at 16. Now, when we ask Americans, when do you start working? It starts as early as 11 and 12. Now, almost all teenagers in the United States at some point have worked. Some point during high school, everyone says they started working. Now, if you look at other industrialized countries, especially in Europe, that number drops to almost 10%. Now, at any given time, out of all our teenagers, almost 63% of them work. And in the 80s, there was this rapid increase. It went up to almost 80% and kind of stabilized since. Now, more summers than school years, obviously. Those of you who remember part-time work, did you work in the summers? Summer camp? Yes. More summers than school year. And on average, so if you ask a lot of American kids, where do you work, how much do you work, they say, oh, a few hours here and there. In reality, it's mostly 17 hours on average per week. And in the summer, the average is 29, but it goes up to 40. So work is such an important part of teenage culture in America. Now, how did I get into it? Well, my research started this super snowy day in the suburbs of New York. Do you know those days when they don't cancel school, but there's so much snow? Yes, of course we do. You know when school is like in session, but you show up and there's nobody? I had a class like that. I showed up for school. I was supposed to be a teaching assistant, and there was nobody. And I figured, okay, maybe they just couldn't make it to school. So I did what any reasonable person does. I went to get a cup of coffee. And here I noticed something. At this, big coffee chain that I went to get my cup of coffee, everyone was there. Most of the students who couldn't make it to class somehow magically made it to work. And I wondered why. And one kid there, Josh, not his real name, here's what he said. He said, nobody notices when I'm not in class. But when I'm at work, I matter. I matter and I'm important. That's why I showed up for work and not school. Now here's what I found very confusing. I assumed he would need the money, right? Like why else did he risk his life, several hours of commute, he had to get there just to do like a double shift of, he was working at a coffee shop. It wasn't that important. I assumed he must really need the money. But he really didn't look like he needed the money. He had this super fashionable cell phone, very fashionable clothes, he had a very nice car. He was not your typical retail worker. And that's how my research started. Now, then I looked back at the data, and here's what the data looks like. This is from the Department of Labor, and this is the composition of our current youth labor force. Now, I assumed that the teenagers who would need the money would be the most likely ones to work. But only in the United States, unlike other industrialized countries, it's the opposite. Look at this. The ones from upper class, not even upper middle class, are the ones who are most likely to work. Now, if you break it down by socioeconomic status, the biggest group comes from, again, the upper class and upper middle class. Now, why would upper middle class kids who have the money, why would they work in retail and service sector jobs? Now, before we get into gender, let's look at that breakdown. And this is what I found very interesting, that this mismatch between young workers, young affluent workers, and really bad jobs. Now, why do I call them bad jobs? How many of you work retail or service or customer service? Did you like it? Why not? It pays nothing. Most of them pay minimum wage. Most of them offer limited hours, so even if you want to gather hours, you can't. And they're, of course, odd shifts, weekends, afternoons, nights, and jobs that are physically challenging. Like even at this coffee shop, Josh had to carry large quantities of garbage. He had to lift things. He had to be on his feet the entire shift, sometimes do double shifts. So bad jobs and affluent workers, it just didn't make sense to me. Now, what did I do? I was interested in first 16 to 19-year-olds, later waves, obviously I also included 19 to 24-year-olds. I did an ethnography of a national coffee chain, let's call it the Coffee Bean. Unfortunately, of course, after my pseudonym, there's now a place called the Coffee Bean, but sorry. I did in-depth interviews, approximately 40 of them at the time. And then, of course, I did a second wave of in-depth interviews with a more general audience, not just the employees of the Coffee Bean, but retail workers, service sector workers, but just young workers in general. And I did one at a public college and one at a private college, approximately 100 of them. And of course, I was done. Do you know that feeling when you're done with a paper, almost done? Then the recession hit. So then I had to do another wave, right? Another wave of interviews, approximately 75 kids this time, just to see what happened before the recession, what happened after, sort of like a before-after. Now, one more thing was missing. The employers. Those employers who don't want to pay anything, but still try to attract young, affluent workers to bad jobs. So I didn't want to talk to them. I spoke to a few, but I really wanted to capture the mechanisms through which they attracted these young, affluent workers. So I did a systematic content analysis of job ads. Now, let's look at a few of these job ads. This is one from H&M. We know H&M. Do we shop there? Have you seen this? It says, you obviously like shopping here, why not work here? So basically, a lot of the job ads and a lot of the employers were trying to recruit, not from a general audience, but from a very specific group of affluent kids who already were shopping at this place. You're fashionably employed. Notice nothing about the pay, nothing about hours, nothing about career. It's just about, if you work here, you're going to be super fashionable. This one's from Express. We're looking for people with style, people who love fashion. We want people like you. And another one, a great job is always in fashion. So a job in this case becomes not something you do for money. You can't ask for hours. You can't even negotiate this. This is what it is. You're basically lucky to have this amazing job because now you're cool and fashionable. We'll come back to the obvious problems with it, but here's the employer's perspective. And it wasn't just these ones. I spoke to a few employers, and a lot of the kids that I interviewed, a lot of them echoed the same sentiment. How do we actually get very affluent and very good-looking kids to be the representations of your brand? Now, the number one thing they said was this: looking good and sounding right. Because you are the face of the brand, right? You're Abercrombie & Fitch, you're Starbucks. And you not only have to look good, but you have to match that brand somehow. Have you been to a store where you notice the people who work there look exactly like what they're selling? Yes, that's exactly what they were going for. One of the girls I interviewed, she worked at Abercrombie & Fitch, and she said, you have to be athletic. Athletic build, shiny hair, I don't know how they measure shine, and gleaming teeth. It was very important. She had to make sure her teeth were shining. But when she got the job, she was so happy. She felt this was an exclusive club and she got in. Now the second thing that was very important was using the products. Has anyone worked for a job where you were supposed to use the products? Yes. Now, for her case, where she was, during the time when she was working at Abercrombie & Fitch, she had, I think, a 30% discount. But every week, she had to buy something. And it had to be something new. A new polo, a different color flip-flops, but it had to be a new product. Now, by the time she was done with Abercrombie & Fitch, she said she accumulated so much debt that by working, she actually lost money. Now, a lot of them also use a very lengthy interview process. just to weed out the kids who need these jobs, right? So you're working because you need the money. They don't want those particular employees. One of the girls I spoke to just said, I couldn't just work anywhere. It had to be Bloomingdale's. It had to be the purse department. And because of that, she had to wait like 6 months. And a lot of employers knew about this, and they were using this as a mechanism to get the most affluent workers. Now, it wasn't just the discounts, right? A lot of them had employee discounts, 30%, 40%, but more importantly, it was the prestige of the brand. Now, you ask these kids, well, why do you work for this job? And one of the questions I actually asked was, well, if someone else offered you more money and more flexibility, but didn't have a good brand, would you take it? And majority of them said, no. All I care about is the brand. I want this cool brand because I want to be associated with the brand. And here's the worst one. A lot of the employers said, oh, we don't want kids from low-income neighborhoods, oh, because their friends would be here. They'll ask for discounts. They'll ask for free stuff. So employers are discriminating on the basis of income very clearly. Now, also, in addition to this one layer of inequality, socioeconomic status, we add racial inequality. What do we mean by this? A lot of the companies had a look, right? And the look happens to be overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly middle class and very affluent, right? And a lot of these companies were systematically discriminating on the basis of both socioeconomic status and race. And when we look at our law, there's almost no protection. Now, of course, a lot of the kids I spoke to knew about this, and they had little techniques to get around this. One kid I talked to, Mason, he's from Newark, and he said, no, they understand, so I have to change my address. So he always said, especially when he was applying to places like Short Hills Mall, he would change his address and use his grandmother's address, which wasn't in Newark. And what happens as a result? The ones who really need these jobs cannot get them. So the kids who really need these jobs to stay in school or help their families are the ones who are left out of the labor force. And some of them get stuck in fast food jobs. Now, here's the problem. We ask students, and these kids, how do you feel about kids who work in fast food? And a lot of them don't see structural inequality. A lot of them say, well, it's their fault. They don't see race, they don't see SES, but what they see is this. They have untucked shirts, baggy pants, crooked hats. It's because they're pimply, they're overweight. It's their fault, right? There isn't structural inequality. If only they had better clothes, they could get it. Now, we said our law hasn't caught up with what we call aesthetic labor, right? Now, a lot of these service sector jobs and a lot of retail jobs have these aesthetic labor requirements, but there's very little. Now, one lawsuit, Gonzalez v. Abercrombie & Fitch, this was in 2005, and Gonzalez argued there was discrimination, both on the basis of race and socioeconomic status. And this was the only case they settled, partially because in their company memos, they openly said, well, the all-American look is overwhelmingly white and middle class. But had they not actually framed it or said it, the law actually has a lot of leeway for employers to hire whoever they want. So aesthetic labor basically becomes a way for companies to discriminate. Okay, so far we see a lot of race, so far we see a lot of SES, but we haven't seen gender. Now, when you ask employers, who do you want as the face of your company, women seem to be doing better in retail jobs and service sector jobs. Now, traditionally, if we look at the youth labor force, like early teenagers, everyone in the literature calls it gender utopia, right? This was a time when boys and girls are kind of equally likely to be employed. Labor force participation is the same. In fact, girls are slightly more likely to work. And based on aesthetic labor, a lot of employers say, oh yeah, girls are just better at this. They have social skills, so I prefer hiring girls. Now, let's look at the data. If we look at the National Longitudinal Study of Youth, and this is from one of the most recent waves, and in this study I looked at 12 and 16-year-olds. Now, what do we know about the gender wage gap? Now, basically, if you're trying to study the gender wage gap, we have three main approaches. Think about it. Not just like teenagers, but in the adult labor force. Why do men and women get paid differently? Can you think?
Traditionally, it's that way. Patriarchy, and it's a tradition. You know, the men are the providers, so they are the ones that deserve to get paid more.
Very nice, based on the provider role. What else? How else do women face discrimination in the workplace? What else?
Women are paid less because it's assumed that they're going to have children, so they're not going to be focused on their jobs.
Oh, children, absolutely, and domestic duties. It is assumed that they're going to have children. Anything else?
Women are more afraid of asking for raises, so they usually just stay wherever.
Very good point. Women don't ask for raises, men do. Now, we can categorize all these ideas under basically three main approaches. The first approach is the human capital approach. Do we know this approach? Have we heard of it? Now, human capital approach says this. Women and men are paid different amounts because they just have different characteristics. Now, women just have less human capital or skill or less education or less experience, or they work fewer hours. And partially, these individual explanations are based on interruptions in the workplace. Women like work fewer hours, or they leave the workforce because they have children, or because they have to take care of their elderly parents, or because they do more housework. So all individual explanations. Now, second group of people say the opposite. They say, forget individual differences, look at occupational segregation. Men and women don't get paid the same because they don't work in the same jobs. They work in different jobs, different sectors. Can you think of like something that pops in your head when you say a woman's job? Nursing. What else? Elementary school teachers, kindergarten teachers.
Secretarial.
Secretary, very nice. And once something becomes a woman's job, it's like it gets paid less. Now, nursing is very interesting because as men became nurses, nursing became a higher paying job. So it's how society creates these ideas of men's jobs and women's jobs. Now, we know that men and women work in different sectors. Even within the same job, men tend to be concentrated in managerial positions and women in non-managerial positions. And we do see a difference between full-time and part-time. But percentage of women in jobs kind of explains if something's a woman's job, the job itself starts paying less. And the third one, and this is kind of an older thing, it was a difference in values. And believe me, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, this was a very dominant explanation. Men and women, just like women don't ask for more money, men and women don't get paid the same because they work for different reasons, right? Their reasons for working are different. Women like social reasons. They care about the environment, they care about the people, they just don't care about money. Which in 1990 was refuted by Jacobs and Steinberg, but this is still a surviving idea. Now, let's look at the little kids. I thought looking at 12-year-olds would be this amazing time. Like this would be a social laboratory for us. Here's a time when boys and girls, they don't have children, they're not married, right? They don't have spouses, they don't have housework. So all these like explanations, they don't matter. Here's this nice social laboratory where we can control for everything. Now, look at them when they're 12 and 13. And blue is for girls, and red is for boys. When they're 12 and 13, This is labor force participation. They're equally likely to be employed. 14 and 15, obviously, people start working more. And 16, they both work. So if you look at rates of employment, it's very similar. Okay, here's one thing that's not similar. At 12 and 13, they get paid the same amount. Once they reach 14 and 15, you see the first gender wage gap, right? Boys start getting paid more. And look, it's not a lot of money, but they're kids. The whole thing is not a lot of money. And by the time they get to be 16, that gap widens. Now, what happens? Now, using statistical models, which I will not get into, using the NLSY data, I know you're very sorry. Here's what I found out. Individual factors didn't really matter, right? They were at the same skill level, same education, same hours, and if you control for everything, that wasn't the cause of the gap. I also didn't find any value differences. They both worked for social reasons. They were equally likely to value money. There was no difference in their attitudes towards work. But jobs mattered. Boys and girls were employed in different types of jobs. And freelance versus employee type jobs. Girls tended to be concentrated in freelance jobs, whereas boys quickly moved into employee type jobs. And as they moved, girls kind of stayed. And not because of anything bad. They were just told, you're so good as a babysitter. You should really stay. But did the parents pay more? Not so much. Now, even within like freelance jobs, what do girls do? Girls babysit, but what do boys do? Can you think of a freelance jobs that boys do?
Shovel snow.
Yard work, shoveling snow. Which pays more? Shoveling snow. We care about our yards. Come on. Forget the children. Now, even though it's very intensive work, childcare did not bring a lot of money. Whereas yard work was great money. Even within, right, boys are doing yard work, boys tended to be, in recent years, they're moving into freelance work and babysitting. Do we know any boy babysitters? Do you think they get paid more or less? Way more. They're seeked after, especially to babysit boys, right? So the second form of inequality. So even within like freelance jobs, we see inequality. And finally, we see a lot of gendering within employee type jobs. So most people looked at these retail jobs as minimum wage, all the same. They weren't. The girls were placed in more social positions. You're so good with people. You're amazing. Don't handle money. So boys were handling money. Girls were handling the difficult customers. And girls were more likely to be asked, can you help? Just work a little bit off the clock and just have unpaid work. Now, what did we find? On top of the statistical work, especially in like in-depth interviews, social skills were a major issue. Girls were constantly told, you're so good with people. But what they actually heard was not that they were good with people. What they heard is, you're just not good with numbers, or you're not good at being a manager. You're just a bad manager, just deal with customers. And you're a people person. And here's the weird part, even in like a place like, you know, the Coffee Bean, where physical, like, this isn't physical labor, but they were told, oh, this is a really big bag. You can't really do this. So their physical abilities were downplayed. And they were constantly asked to be nice. Work off the clock. We really need you. And it was amazing, like, how many times the kids were asked to work off the clock. Now, why do we care? What are the policy implications? Occupational segregation and the gender wage gap starts early. Most of our research looks at 18-year-olds, right? The adult wage gap. Or the one after, like after college. But by the time young people are in the labor force, by that time, gender wage gap already started. And we already socialized our teenagers that these inequalities are there. So By the time we start the adult workforce, we already have the problem of the wage gap. Now, one of the things we can do is an early education on the wage gap. And also education of the parents. Parents happen to be the first employers, whether it's babysitting or yard work, and they might not notice it. So some of our interviews with the parents, a lot of them said, of course I'm a feminist. I wouldn't I wouldn't discriminate against girls. But at the end, a lot of them paid girls a lot less. Now, one of the things we tell our girls is, you don't negotiate. But that's simply not true. A lot of the girls did negotiate. But one of the problems we find is, what happens when they do negotiate? So a lot of them, when they asked for money, they weren't nice. They weren't team players. Whereas when boys asked for more money, they knew their value. They were go-getters. So we have to, most of our policies focus on what girls can do to change themselves, but we don't see the structural issues. And the last policy implication is, of course, with information. A lot of the salaries, both in among teenagers, and of course, more importantly, later life, they're not public. So a lot of men and women, they don't know how much the other person makes. And this is a very cultural thing. We don't talk about money. But the problem is, we don't know how much that position pays for. And because of lack of information, we can have systematic inequality. That's all I have. Let's open it up for questions. Thank you so much.